I just turned on a hotspot. Hopefully that'll.
I'm getting a message that the live stream went live. Heather?
Okay, it just now said done, so make sure we don't have any other guests. Okay.
My internet is being silly. I just turned on a hotspot. Hopefully that'll.
Good.
All right. I am going to call the meeting of the message that the live stream went live. Heather?
Okay, it just now said done, so make sure we don't have any other guests. Okay.
My internet is being silly. I just turned on a hotspot.
Hey, Heather, you're just going to want to close that window or mute that other window.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Good.
No worries.
All right.
It's always fun to hear an echo.
Call the meeting of the message that the live stream went live. Heather? Are we good to
Got it?
start? Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to call the meeting of the Salem Public Art Commission to order. It's 9:36. Today is August 12th. I'm going to begin with some introductions, and so we welcome Mayor Bennett, who's with us this morning. My name is Chris Darcy. I'm the chair of the commission. Could we just do a round robin?
Yes, Eileen Cotter-Howell, Commissioner.
Kelly James, Commissioner.
Paula Booth, Commissioner.
Michael Hernandez, Commissioner.
Spencer Emmerich, Commissioner.
And what about our other guests? Can you introduce
Good morning.
yourself?
This is Ricardo Besseril with Day CPM. I'm the owner's representative for the construction project of the new police station.
Steve Belshaw with Salem Police Department.
And I'm Heather Dimke with Public Works.
So before we get into our main agenda, I wanted to kind of open up the floor to Mayor Bennett. He and I had a chance to chat 10 days or so ago about a couple of topics, and he expressed interest in attending one of our meetings, and luckily this meeting was coming right up. So Mayor Bennett, welcome.
Well, thank you, Chris. And I'm going to ask for your help sort of going back to our conversation, make sure I cover the issues we talked about. But I hadn't been to an art commission for some time, and thought this would be a great opportunity. What really prompted my call to Chris was a real concern as I was watching the legislature heading forward into the special session they've had over the past couple of days. They had come up with a $50 million allocation to cultural programs and arts programs around the state. And I wasn't sure what our situation was in Salem to access those funds. And Chris and I had an opportunity to discuss that and to realize that this really occurs through a county, as I understand it, Chris, and you please correct me. The money will pass through a county program. I've been very concerned about the impact of COVID on the arts community, the loss of the art fair this year, it being a virtual art fair rather than our traditional walkthrough event. And then the impact on some of the various cultural programs. I was particularly concerned about the Elsinore, the Grand Theater, Pinnacle, some of those kinds of programs, and just wanted to make sure I checked in on what my role might be to assist in attracting some of those funds our direction. And what I found out is it's a fairly well-planned process. I had gotten a call from Senator Betsy Johnson, who's one of the co-chairs of Ways and Means, alerting me to this and expressing some concern that we might miss out on some of the allocations as the really well-organized Portland arts programs begin to move in on that $50 million. So it's a huge allocation. It's a tremendous statement by, I think, the state and the legislature of their support for the various cultural and arts programs. And I'm really interested in making sure that we are positioned to be substantial recipients. You know this better than I do, just how vibrant our arts community is in Salem, how important it is to us to just the livability of the community, I don't know, just sort of the whole milieu and it being the kind of place that we all love to live. And I wanted to just make sure we were, as I said, positioning ourselves to participate. So that was my primary concern. And then we had a couple other topics, Chris, you may have to help me with, that we had talked about, if you recall. I was looking through my notes and I just couldn't pin down. I knew there was some other issue that I wanted to visit with you about. If you recall.
Mayor, we talked also about the Echo Earth Ball.
Yes,
And
thank
how,
you. I keep
how
trying
that
to
has
forget.
become just a real icon in Riverfront Park, especially with the Peter Courtney Bridge and the upcoming Rotary Amphitheater, and the fact that it's a project, any kind of a repair or stabilization project is going to have a large price tag. And, you know, we talked about the potential of seeking some special funding from the legislature for that.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. I knew it was something this has been an issue I'm sure you all are aware of for some time. The Earth Ball is a failed project in terms of its ability to survive Oregon weather and the kind of maintenance that's required for it. Along with that, it also has some really substantial structural issues because it was an acid ball. It was part of it was its protection was a substantial, as I understand it, asbestos covering. And during the past, however many years it's been since it became Echo Earth, it has become increasingly exposed. The asbestos has become increasingly exposed and is posing a really serious difficulty in rejuvenating that, which I think is a major community project and one that we really have to pay attention to. Right now, the last number quoted to me, and it's been within the past year, was around $1 million project to really get it cleaned up, to get it back into a condition where it can sort of be rebuilt tile by tile. And in talking with the city staff that's assigned to this, I began to realize that the difficulty in the current fundraising environment, which is focused on a whole batch of different programs and issues here in the community, from Jerry Frank Amphitheater to the YMCA, the Union Gospel Mission, these numerous projects that are really demanding substantial public support, that perhaps the best way to proceed, and the one that I'm interested in hearing your thoughts, I want to be thoughtful of how you all might look at this, is to go to the legislature in January. That would be go into a regular session with them and seek $1 million or whatever our number is, or some portion of that number, a substantial portion of it, to help us do this. We have had over the past several years real success working with the legislature on funding projects, and particularly on specific projects. And a good example is, I know there was a great deal of news coverage that we had lost $20 million for our water system. And I thought all along that was a little early to be declaring defeat on that. And we continued to work on it, and were able to secure the $20 million for the project during this most recent special session. we just have done really well working with them, as I said, over the past several years. So I thought I would kind of bounce the idea off of you, see if you see that as a real possibility and one that you all could support. Because if I go into this, I can certainly work with the council for their support, but I think having the Arts Commission support would be really important as I go into trying to talk the legislature, which has a more statewide interest into doing this. We will have, I think, at least one more session of Peter Courtney as president of the Senate, which gives us as much leverage as any community in the state has. And Peter has been an enormous supporter of these various projects. And this one being so totally integrated with the Peter Courtney Bridge and part of the park, along with the Jerry Frank Amphitheater, I think would give us the kind of visibility we're going to need both locally and statewide to make a real case. So that's something I'm very interested in. I think that is an iconic feature down there, and one that I would hate to see end up going back to an old black acid ball without the asbestos covering, which I'm afraid that's where we could end up if we're not vigorous in moving forward on this thing at this point. So that's kind of what I'm up to.
Thank you first of all, for talking with me about those topics previously and for joining us this morning. Would anyone like to ask the mayor a question, comment in support of seeking funding for the Echo Earth Ball or anything else?
Got any other projects you want to? Yes.
Eileen.
Mayor, you said that you talked with the city, I think you said planning, about the repair.
Yeah, the staff person on this that I deal with, and there may be others, is Courtney Knox Bush in the mayor manager's office. And she's been kind of tracking this. And she gave me a rough estimate. I know it was rough, but I think she's being somewhat realistic and gave me $1 million. I think it was to tell me this is bigger than a bread box. You know, this is going to be a major activity, not one that we're going to be able to go to the general fund or the tot fund or some other internal funding to resolve. We either go to the public or we go to the legislature or we do all of the above. So that's kind of where that came from. So if it sounds sort of glib to say $1 million, I think she was just saying it's big, you know.
That was the figure that was from at least a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And
probably more by now.
I was wondering if you know, or if you can speak to this, is the plan still to remove the asbestos?
That's my understanding. I can't imagine we would move forward on that without getting the asbestos out of there and then dealing with what that does when you deal with something as complicated as a sort of global shape with little square tiles or large square tiles. I assume there's going to have to be some adjustment with something to create the correct size for the ball to have everything come back on. So I don't know how all that goes together. I'm just basing on, you know, what I probably ran into in about 5th grade trying to do, you know, wrap a beach ball in square paper, you know, that kind of thing.
Well, I'm absolutely thrilled at your thought about going to the legislature for help with this, because we have not been able to figure out how in the world we could possibly hit $1 million, which is what the figure was.
Yeah, I think it's, for me, part of it is my own background, having been a legislator, having represented a variety of organizations, particularly education at the legislature. That's an area I understand is kind of that ways and means money side of it. We have a very effective lobbyist that works for the city as a contract lobbyist with the city. I think we'd have a real shot to make it happen. And I just can't underscore enough the importance of having Peter Courtney still in the legislature in a leadership position. He has just been such a champion for this park and for this city. I hate to just take advantage of it, but oh well, do what you can. Use the tools they hand you.
Kelly?
So I do have a question. If we, let's say that as we get into work on the acid ball, and we find that there would be an easier option than rebuilding it the way that it was originally put with the tiles on, is that something we could consider?
I think so. I think as we start moving forward, there is a constituency or a constituent for the acid ball. Roger Gertenrich stays in touch about it. And I think we would need to figure out, this would be, I hope, something you all would be interested in. Who should be on that kind of planning committee and kind of project committee? How would that, I'm not obviously, the only metaphor I can think of is a beach ball and a big piece of wrapping paper. I'm the wrong guy. So it's people like you who understand that kind of issue, that kind of project that I think would need to help us out. I am concerned that when you remove the asbestos, you change the size of the project, and then what do you do? Because all those pieces are sitting there. How do you put it all back together? But
and how do we get them all to stay on there for another 50 years?
Well, that's got to be done right. And I'm not at all trying to undercut the people who put that together. It lasted all these years. It just clearly was not the grouting or whatever was used for it needed to be of a different caliber, perhaps, or whatever it takes to keep that thing protected from the weather and also protected when it's being cleaned and maintained. I mean, that we have a more secure and a resilient project in place, I think. So that's going to be the kind of stuff, I suspect that's what adds to the price tag for a project like this.
Right. I think that when we did sort of a high level exploration of what this might take, we didn't drill, too deeply.
Right.
But the city, I think, has some conservators on contract, people that can be tapped to actually take a closer look at this and present us with some options. I do think, I think this is really ripe for a line item appropriation from the legislature, but I think we're going to have to do some more homework before we're really well prepared to have the conversation about, how to make it, how to repair it so it's good for the future.
Yeah, how to repair it and how to present it to the legislature as a long-term, that we've got it right, we've got,
right.
And I can certainly begin with the city manager, or Heather may know who at her agency of the city, who are the people that can kind of begin to describe for me what I need to get the city to agree to, the city council to agree to in terms of developing the staff report or the contractor's review that gives us the kind of what's it going to take, some sort of, at least at this point, more detailed plan than we want to get it fixed. And we've got a problem. And I don't know how that, right now, I don't know how that comes together, and we'll look for any advice, but I can certainly get that started with the council, that we get some money allocated to this project to get it a little more clearly defined than I can define it.
That's great. We really appreciate it. Any other questions for the mayor?
Anything else going on?
Plenty. Plenty.
I can share my problems with you, but I think I'll just let you let you off the hook.
All right, we appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me a few minutes. I really do appreciate it. And if you have any thoughts on particularly on either of the issues I mentioned this morning, please contact me directly and just share your thoughts, because I can get kind of the larger concepts formed, but when I get down into the detail, I really, like everyone else, I think, rely on people with real expertise rather than just me talking about it to somebody. It just helps to have any thoughts that really bear weight beyond, whatever the mayor says, kind of stuff. Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you very much for serving on this board or on this commission. This is a really important one and just keeps making great contributions to the community. I'm personally really looking forward to the day Belshaw pulls off the cover on that new piece of art in front of the police station. Congratulations on that. I'm really excited about that. I think the vast majority of the community is really excited as well. And we can't wait to get the cops out of the basement and out into the light of day. We're really looking forward to it.
Good.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the first thing on our agenda is approval of the consent agenda. I'm looking for a motion to make that approval.
Chris, I talked with Heather about this. There's a change that I'd like to make in how one of my comments was written, and Heather was going to go ahead and make that change.
All right, so I'm still, with that correction, I'm still looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
And I motion to approve the consent agenda with that one change.
Is there a second?
I second.
All those in favor of the consent agenda, say aye.
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 Any opposed? No. Consent agenda is approved. Let's move into our discussion items. First up is the police station. And great to have an enthusiastic support for the sculpture by Blessing Hancock from the mayor. I asked that this be put on the agenda again, because I remain concerned that that our nation is engaged in a conversation about the role of police in the community. And I realize that the planning for the sculpture at the police station happened well before COVID-19, well before the murder of George Floyd, and well before the demonstrations and protests that we've seen across the country. But I wanted to, and I understand that the sculpture is fabricated and that it soon will be on a truck on its way to Salem, Oregon. But I remain concerned that there are phrases on this piece that I think are not going to be well received. And I understand that, Ricardo, thank you for talking to Blessing about the fact that she has expressed concern that any modification at this point would be expensive. But I wanted to just have any further discussion about that situation this morning. And I, quite frankly, I haven't spoken with any of you really about it. I've had a conversation with Heather, and I was approached by another person in the community, which led me to reach out to Heather again. So anyway, any comments from anyone?
Was the person in the community someone who wants to remain anonymous, or could we know their name?
Yeah, you could know their name. It was Sarah Swanborn, who is involved with nonprofits. She's a very active, she is part of what I would describe as the tennis community. People who get together and, play tennis and talk about things. And she reached out to me, I think following a conversation that she had with people in that general part of the community.
And your concern over the words, could you also tell us what phrases in particular you're looking at?
I don't have the list in front of me. Thin blue line was one. My concern is more that the piece does not include things like Black Lives Matter. I'd have to go back to my earlier email that I sent out to all of you with a couple of other ideas. That the piece does not seem to relate in any way to the situation that we find ourselves in. I understand that at our last meeting, we talked about using the plaque to further elaborate on the process. There was considerable community involvement at the time. And I support that, but I don't think that is going to be good enough for some people. I mean, I hope that you have all followed not only the removal of major monuments that relate to people who may have been slave owners or people with certain political persuasions, but there has been the removal, the serious damage to other works of public art. The Big Elk in Portland, for example, which has no relationship to Black people, slavery, anything that I can tell. And I do not want this sculpture to be greeted by the public in that way. I'm worried about, quite frankly, I am worried about that happening in Salem. I mean, the bas-reliefs in front of the Capitol are still wrapped up and not repaired. So, Sacagawea and pioneers. So I'm just, it is a great concern to me. Kelly.
That being said, I think there are those who are looking to lash out and destroy anything, whether it's relevant to this current situation or not. And I realize that having a piece of art in front of the police station might be fair game, no matter what it has on it.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah, not that means anything here or there. It's just that I think anything that we put there, whether it says Black Lives Matter, still might make it a target. If they can burn the elk, then I don't think anything is, I think everything's fair game to those people.
Other comments?
I agree with you about the phrase thin blue line. And I was going to ask DC Belshaw to elaborate a little bit. When I went over the initial list of phrases that were given by the community, there were quite a few phrases that made it into the final, what actually is going on to the sculpture, that were not part of the original list. And I was wondering how that came about.
So we sought input from several groups. So we sought input from our employees, both the police department, every employee, dispatch and all of that. Since this was going in front of our new home, we thought that they should have input. We did events at the Salem Art Fair. We did it at Public Works Day. We sought input online. So the final list was culled from several lists of input that we sought, and we were seeking themes. So if there were a number of words that that were probably very appropriate to put on the sculpture, but were only mentioned by one person. So we were looking for the theme of the community, the theme of our employees. And so we looked for things that were repeated more than once. And that's how we put the final list together.
And actually, that's actually true that most of the words that are on the list were repeats. But there were about 24 things that made it to the final list that were not on this original list that Heather sent out to us. And it seemed that perhaps that there was either a list missing or, you know, maybe there.
Yeah, and there may be a list missing. I have probably 4 or 5 different lists. I think we tried to send everything to Heather, but we may have missed a list that we didn't send to you.
And in this particular case, that one phrase, thin blue line, wasn't even on the list.
Okay.
And so of all the phrases, I'm you know, went over it fairly thoroughly this week. And all the other phrases, it would be pretty easy to defend all of them, as far as I'm concerned, with the one exception of that particular phrase. Because over time, that phrase has changed meaning. And in this current situation and the way things have evolved, it doesn't have the same meaning that it had originally. And so that particular phrase would be very difficult to defend for us as partners. So I don't know what to do about that. Again, I recognize that it would be extremely expensive to alter something again. And, you know, Chris, you brought it up before, and I haven't any idea what expense would be involved. Do you?
I do not, but Rachel, you had your hand up. Did
Yeah, I just wanted to add my voice to the concern about that phrase, especially considering, as Eileen pointed out, that it's not on any of the lists that were circulated. And I would just put forward that yes, obviously cost is a consideration, but I think that this outweighs that. And especially also getting back to what you were saying earlier, Chris, about public art in general being a target for vandalism. I think that basically that having that phrase on it makes it, you know, even more so a target. I really am uncomfortable with having that on the sculpture.
Spencer.
Ricardo, did Blessing give like a rough estimate of what it might cost to alter it?
No, what Blessing indicated to me was that she would be 2 things. One is that she said it would be significant at the point of fabrication. As I circulated several of the pictures, you can see that the sculpture is largely fabricated. It just hasn't been assembled yet. So she just made a blanket statement that whatever change we made, no matter how minor or major, it would be significant. She also indicated that schedule-wise, everybody would need to be aware that if there were changes made, the schedule is not going to be achievable. So it will not be a piece of art that is sitting there when the police department opens. The next thing she indicated was that she could prepare a price and determine both cost and schedule impacts if she knew specifically what the requested changes were.
Okay. Okay, well, I think that's helpful to know that, you know, she can do it if we are more specific. Has she submitted, oh, Rachel, go ahead.
Just one quick thing. I believe her budget also included a contingency. So it would be interesting to know where she is within the budget itself, if that's possible to find out.
Yeah,
at
the
this point.
contingency was fairly minor, and it's my understanding that that contingency has been used up for things such as she didn't understand that she had to have a public works bond for the state of Oregon to be able to have her installers perform labor on a project site, which going through the contracting process and J.E. Dunn being a reputable contractor, making sure they're dotting their I's and crossing their T's, they can't be selective. The law is the law. And so some of those lack of understanding and familiarity with some of those requirements have swallowed up the majority of that minimal contingency that did exist.
Okay.
I'm really glad you actually said that on the record, because we need to do a better job, we the SPAC, as we help artists prepare for doing some of these commissions, that everyone understands the cost of working in the public realm, because not everybody remembers all that stuff all the time. So I'm glad you mentioned that. All right, back to the main issue. Another question for you, Ricardo. Did Blessing submit any working drawings for the sculpture that would help us see where the words are and how they fit together?
I don't think with the specificity of what you would be after. It was largely diagrammatic in nature. The wording, as far as the layout, it was mainly from a structural review standpoint on how the sculpture was going to be adhered to a foundation and how the structure itself was going to be constructed. And then the wording at that point in time was sort of overlapping in process with the processes that DC Belshaw just explained, the public input, whatnot. So the shop drawings that we were looking at the time were largely, if I recall correctly, just Roman numeral characters and things like that were just kind of spread throughout haphazardly to indicate that there would be eventually words that would replace all of that.
Okay. Other comments? I guess the big question is, do we want to be specific about the removal of certain phrases and the substitution of of new phrases in order to get some kind of a quote from Blessing, or not? I understand where we are in terms of budget, schedule. I think that you cannot ignore what's going on in the world around us. I'd have a hard time explaining to people that, oh yeah, was too late or it was too expensive.
Ricardo, I wonder if we could get just a quick update on the schedule. I know you'd mentioned previously that it's going to be on the road from Indiana shortly. So where are we at with that?
Yeah, just thank you. I was just going to clarify that. So just real quick on schedule, it is currently anticipated and confirmed to be installed on the project site between the dates of September 14th and being completed by September 17th. Sculpture, as I indicated, is largely fabricated, but they are assembling still the panels to the structural shell, if you will. It'll be on a truck headed over from Indianapolis sometime before September 14th. So my point being that it's middle of August right now. We have not, despite all the conversation and inclusive dialogue with Blessing, we have not indicated to her to stop any form of construction at this point in time or delivery. And so if we basically have about a 2-week window is what I envision before they're going to be done fabricating and probably be starting to think about shipping the individual components this direction.
And then, Mr. Belshaw, I think the opening of the police station was middle October or October 10th.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess Heather, bridging those two things together, part of this decision, Blessing has indicated that it wouldn't matter how minor the change is at this point. Any change we have to make that change, knowing that sculpture will not be there on October 10th.
I didn't share, I shared the pictures that you forwarded, I think just with Chris. I can, if folks are interested in seeing, there's just a couple, shows what the piece looks like.
Yes, that would be good.
Okay.
And as Heather's pulling up the individual piece, it'll show the cut metal wrapping around the skeleton, which you can imagine several of these sections will eventually come together to form the art piece. The color, however, has not been applied to the picture that she's pulling up at this point. So it's not a stainless steel.
And folks see this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
So there was just those two that I saw.
Yes, that's correct. So the top picture, several of those components get completely assembled, and then those get attached to the bottom picture. And those two pieces of the bottom picture form the circular skeletal structure.
Any further discussion? Any direction we want to take?
I think that we need to at least find out what the possibility would be to remove that one phrase.
And see if she could give a timeline, a more accurate timeline with that.
I agree that we need to ask. I guess I looked at the wrong list. I didn't realize that was one of the phrases on the piece until just this morning, and I'm sorry about that. But I think we need to ask and get a quote. You know, we're going to be stuck with a bill to repair a sculpture if we don't try to fix it on this end.
I would agree with that. I'd say, I mean, even to the point of it installing September 14th, I would say foregoing the idea that that's going to happen. I would like to understand this better, what the cost would be. And it's more important that it doesn't get installed, doesn't get on a truck, that we maybe even make the decision that we're pausing for the idea that it even gets put on a truck. I'd hate to see any expenses spent towards getting it here and then a decision made to return it to alter or make the changes. So I'd say, yeah, let's understand what the costs are. See exactly where they're located on the sculpture would be interesting to see. What its final placement is. That seems like that's a no-brainer for us to be looking at some images of it, and then understand what those costs would be.
Kelly?
And all that being said, I agree. But we probably would not want to wait until our next meeting to deal with this once we find that information out, I would assume.
Yeah, right. I think time where the sands are falling in the hourglass pretty quickly.
Yeah, so we need to
schedule.
Figure that we'll be talking about this as soon as we can find out, I would assume.
So forgive my question here.
budget, once we find out what an additional change might look like, I'm not sure where that funding is coming from.
I'm not either, but I don't know what we're talking about. I mean, I don't know what that, yeah, I have no idea. So it's hard for me to, it's hard for me to make a final decision without knowing what some of the pieces are. So we know any delay would mean that the sculpture is not going to be in front of the building when the building is officially dedicated. That to me is, that's not the deal maker for me. The deal maker for me is, what are we doing as a public art commission to ensure a successful project, given the fact that many issues surrounding the role of this public function, the police, has changed dramatically in the last few months. You know, what are we doing to reflect that and to ensure that this piece is going to be well received? You know, I thought we did a good job on the front end. We picked a highly skilled artist. You can see that from the photographs, you know, this is going to be a well-crafted work of art. We sought input from the community in a variety of ways. The police had their employees comment, entirely appropriate. You know, then there just have been huge issues across the country around the role of the police. And I mean, to me, it's like, yes, I don't know where this money is going to come from, but I also don't know if we're talking about $50,000 or 10. And I guess I would want to know that.
I agree with that because I have no idea what that round number is. I mean,
Right.
again, where it's located and what pieces it affects based on how it's engineered in terms of sections and where it actually lies to know if it's, you know, from Blessing's team herself to say on a scale of 1 to 10, it's landing in a highly difficult, affects quite a bit of the overall versus, you know, hey, it's a lower rank in terms of its impact on making changes. And if it's 10K, I mean, to what Chris is saying, I completely agree. Is it a 10K thing? Is it a $50,000 thing? And understanding that, like, how quick can we have a fairly firm understanding of what that cost would be? You know, is it fair to say in the next week we could push to have, you know, that dialogue and have Blessing come back to us?
Well, and
I'm not sure. I certainly could ask the question. I need to ask a clarifying question. Are we talking about just removal of 3 words, or are we talking about removal of 3 words and replacing them with something? So something's got to fill that space. So
I would,
or the size of the other words adjust, or we reuse something again, or
There were a lot of other words on the initial list that could substitute for that. And so I think that would be okay. It would make more sense to me that she would probably choose to replace the words rather than, you know, just have a blank there. She would need to have something.
absolutely, right.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the way the piece is designed.
Yes.
Yes.
And sorry if I forgot, but did Black Lives Matter make it to the list?
No.
Okay.
Black Lives Matter, where it was on the original list that was presented by the community, but it only had one. And most of the ones that only had one were not included.
Okay.
Yeah. There was also an All Lives Matter that was submitted once, it looked like.
I don't think we want to use that phrase. All right, Ricardo, do you have enough specifics from us to be able to reach out to Blessing regarding this?
I think so. I'm going to give a hypothetical back to you and see if I'm in the realm here of answering where I think the commission is at. So I would ask her to pause on construction right now, because we don't want to have the sculpture arrive while we're trying to make this decision. So pausing so that we don't continue to incur costs. would be the request. In addition, wherever and indicating with specificity where and how many times thin blue line is used on the sculpture. At all those locations, I would request that she remove, give us a price to remove that and replace with a phrase such as Black Lives Matter, if that would fit, but I guess that would be determined in the future because nobody's directed her on what would be okay with the commission to put back in its place, but something that would fit into that same size of removal.
Yes, I
Okay.
think that's, yes.
In the meantime, I think it's important that all the commissioners, if you haven't already looked at the original list, to look at that and decide yourself what you would think would be an appropriate replacement.
I apologize because I imagined that it was sent to me, but I can't find a final list. Is that something that someone could resend to me?
Let me look at the email I found. I can.
Yeah, it's Heather sent it on July 7th to everyone, and the subject is equitous words, phrases.
I think I just want to piggyback the comment I made earlier to reiterate it again. I really would like to see images. Make sure we're looking at the placement of if it's thin blue line or if there's others specific that we understand where they're located, etc. in the grand scheme of things. I wasn't under the impression that words were repeated from the list.
Every word is repeated. Sorry to interrupt. Every single word is used more than once.
Okay, so we need to understand how many times that occurs. And if they're, on both sides or really far apart, etc. Just, I'm a visual person. I really appreciate seeing where they're located. I mean, the idea of how we're going to refit things, to me, that's not a hard problem to solve. I mean, kerning the letters or however that can be done, that seems like to me, that wouldn't be a big issue in terms of the design part of that. But the idea of putting a hold on where we're at, because again, if we found out by the end of the week that some things got attached, that, we should pause. Again, any expenses occurred because we delayed the decision to pause, I think would be a big miss. So again, needing to understand what we're really looking at here. I think we're kind of speculating on what we're dealing with in terms of the overall scope of any revisions.
So I just resent that list. I did just take a quick peek. That final list did have that thin blue line listed on it, so.
Yes, the final list did. The problem was the original list that we received didn't have it.
Okay.
Yeah, so the question is, we never saw a list that was submitted to Blessing until the lists were already submitted and included that line. The first time I saw that list was July 7th.
Yeah.
And that was well beyond the time where she had begun fabricating the sculpture.
I think actually that is something that we as a commission need to remember, because once again, that is something that we could have asked, and none of us thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it sounds like there is consensus among the commissioners for Ricardo to reach out to Blessing to show us how many times thin blue line is repeated on the sculpture, where, and give us an idea, pause her work and give us an estimate of her time and the cost to make a revision to the sculpture. Is there anyone who does not agree with that, with doing that in the immediate future?
I would just add, Chris, that the time is, again, so important that if we could have the answer within a couple of days, that would be really the best solution.
Is Blessing on site in Indiana? Do you know, Ricardo?
I don't know if that for a fact. I do not believe that she is.
Yeah, okay. I also think, given that she must have shop drawings for this piece that probably are, digital, that she could also share with us that would show the placement of the words and what have you. All right. Is there any further discussion on this topic for this morning?
Let me just jump in quickly and say, so we're going to try to get that information quickly from Blessing, it sounds like within a couple days. I have one more week and then I'm taking 2 weeks vacation. I assume once we get that information, we're going to probably want to convene a special meeting so that we can look and process what comes in. So I'm hoping maybe we can do that next week then.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm flexible.
And just a clarification, I'll do my best to speed up urgency on the issue, but I, of course, can't control Blessing's timeline, or she can't control her subcontractor's timeline to get her back pricing, but we'll do our best to expedite it.
I understand that, but thank you for stating it for us all. All right, let's finish up our conversation on this topic and move on to the next item on the agenda then. There's no objection to that.
Thank you, Steve and Ricardo, for joining again today.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got 2 other projects underway, the library project and the convention center. And because the convention center is going to be simple, maybe Michael and I can report on that. We, as you know, there is a committee that's been formed for the project involving folks from the convention center. They brought in 2 people from Oregon Artist Series Foundation, Cherie Wargren from the city, and Rebecca Ziegler have been city staff involved from urban development, urban renewal. $9,000 budget. We had a commitment from Oregon Artist Series Foundation to put another 6 potentially to get the budget up to 15,000 to acquire a painting, a wall mounted piece, an interior piece. Put together a list. Many of you contributed to artists. We got the list down to, we started out maybe with 20 people, got it down to 12. And then ultimately got it down to 3 people. And I'll say those people, but please, we have not gone back to all the artists who submitted work to let them know that they're not in final consideration. So please don't release this information to anyone. But the final 3 people are Rob Bibler, who lives in Salem, has a studio downtown. Richard Thompson, who grew up in Dayton and is now back living on his family farm in Dayton. And Lucinda Parker, who lives in Portland. And all of them have work that fits within our budget. All of them have some substantial pieces in terms of size and impact. And we did a studio visit with Rob Bibler, had a very nice visit with him. Richard Thompson, because he has been represented by a gallery in Texas, is shipping some of his work back to Oregon. And that work will arrive in early September. So we kind of paused our process to be able to see those works in person as opposed to just an image of them. And then Lucinda Parker's work is in Portland at Russo Lee. So, making a visit up there. but that's where that project is. I feel pretty good about, I feel pretty good about the whole thing. Michael, what?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That was a nice summary where we're at. And so as of yesterday, there was a question about going to see Lucinda's work. So I didn't respond. I had a busy day yesterday, but it's been on the front of my mind as to what our theory is. We did agree with Richard Thompson to wait till the pieces arrive. One piece specifically is toward the top of the list. So we thought, okay, that's great. So but we still haven't decided whether or not we're going to go see Lucinda's work. There's no rush to make the decision. Richard, we haven't scheduled the time to make the visit out to Dayton, but we know the window there. So we're on standby to get an update on when those arrive to schedule that visit. So, again, we have a little bit of time. I don't know, Chris, if you have thoughts. I think you shared that we could individually go to visit in Portland. I'd rather we all do it together if we're going to do it cohesively, specifically if the artist is present or anyone's present that's sharing any insight into any works that we're considering, that we're all hearing the same thing. I am in some ways fine with leaving it to be Richard and Rob as the two finalists, but then, a day goes by and then I'm like, well, maybe we should consider going to Portland to see any of the final works that are part of a list of her works. So I'm being somewhat ambiguous, but the good news is we do have some time. We are moving things along. One thought would be if we saw Richard's work, if it made everybody feel any different, that might put bearing on whether or not we want to consider seeing Lucinda's work. So maybe that's where I'm leaving it for today, is let's see Richard's work and see how we feel. We can always schedule time to go up to Portland.
Yeah. Any questions from anyone? Everything's still really in process. I'm having trouble with my hip. That's why I'm trying not to go back and forth to Portland a lot. Eileen.
I have a question about Rob's. I am a huge fan of Rob Bibler's work, but you had mentioned earlier, a couple of months ago, that you were concerned about the placement of the piece. And Rob's work is on paper, and it's usually drawings and sometimes a little watercolor. So have things changed? Is that no longer a concern?
The work that Rob showed us it's not on paper. These are they're large paintings. I had never been in his studio, which is above Cook's Stationery.
Yeah.
And he had some large, beautiful work. And
all oil on canvas.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Really cool.
I was bowled over. I was bowled over because I had not seen his work on that scale. Yeah, it was pretty amazing. I mean, that's why, we could have just purchased a work like right there that morning and not considered anyone else. But I do think that Chrissy at the Convention Center had identified a wall space on the south end of the building, but everything that is in that building can be moved. And so I suspect that depending on what piece is acquired, there might be some movement, in terms of the location.
Well, that's exciting. That's exciting. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, I had never, I didn't realize that his studio was above Cook's Stationery. And there's another studio up there as well.
Right.
And it's pretty cool. I mean, I tried to get Cherie Wargren to join us for that studio visit because I thought it would be important for her as she advances her downtown, improvement agenda on the big scale, to see how using those second story spaces for creative small businesses could actually be good for the Salem economy. And my guess is that she's never been up there. If I had never been up there, she would be less likely to have ever been up there. But it was pretty cool. Yeah. Anyway, all right, that's kind of that's the update there. On the library, and I'll just tee this up quickly. I asked that the library be put on the agenda because I want us to learn from the police station experience in terms of moving any negotiations with artists forward. Because I think that where I think we let things go is that we did not see any shop drawings from Blessing, and we did not sign off on any words for that sculpture. And so I want to make sure that as the architects from Hacker speak to the artist and the librarian speaks to the artist, that SPAC is involved in those conversations. So, do you have a further update, Heather, on where things are with Amanda Wojcik?
Not a whole lot. I did reach out to Aaron Kimsey Engineering. He met with the artist, Amanda, last Friday, I believe. They were going to do another walkthrough in the library just to kind of see the new space in person, so she could get, catch that additional light that's now coming in from the new window space. And then the next step, which there's not a meeting scheduled, I think, is we're assuming she's going to come back to the group in September with somewhat of an updated concept to bring back to the group.
Okay. Any questions or comments about that? What you don't want with these projects is a surprise.
Yes.
No, I agree.
And so I want to make sure that we're doing, if we are the deep rudder for public art in Salem, that we're helping to steer and doing that responsibly. Okay.
Agreed.
Let's move on to murals.
Yeah, can I make a quick suggestion? That might take a little bit longer. We're almost to 11. Do we want to touch on the two maintenance items first? Is that okay?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay, and actually, I just wanted to say I didn't have an opportunity to say this at the beginning because when I arrived, Mayor Bennett was already talking and I didn't want to interrupt him. But I am actually going to have to jump off of the call in a few minutes because I have another meeting that I could not reschedule. So if I disappear, that's what's happened. So just letting you know. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. Well, maybe let's talk about the cube. I have not gone down to look at it myself, but Heather did. And Heather, why don't you report on what you saw?
Yeah, I did. I took a few pictures and they're not of the best quality. Basically, the cube is very dirty. It's filthy, actually. There was some scratched, very light, but you can see it's scratched etching of letters. I couldn't make out what it says. They're not huge, maybe 4 inches on one side. I don't know what that's going to take. And then the other thing is, so we'd gotten an email from a downtown business owner. I think Cherie had gotten it. She forwarded it that it had been vandalized. So that's what I found is the, it needs cleaned, it has scratches, and I don't know how it was installed, but just to very lightly push it and it's wobbly all over. So I'd be surprised if it, that's not a new change in the piece. I don't know how it was installed originally. So the other thing, there is some lighting around it that I think has probably been out for a while, which probably doesn't help. So I've reached out. There's the same lights are around the Mel Katz piece and they're out as well. I've reached out to our staff in Public Works, can hopefully help get that fixed, but I'm not sure what the next steps are for the cube or how much that might cost.
Stephen installed that, right?
Well, Stephen Adams with the city installed that piece.
Yeah.
So Cherie probably has the working drawings for how those wells are structured. And we should probably take a look at that. And then figure out, I think it might be worth it to have Stephen go look at it.
Right.
Was Bruce West part of the installation?
Well, he was certainly there.
He was.
I did not attend that event. I mean, there was an event when that piece was installed.
Uh-huh.
I know because I have pictures of Terry Melton and Bruce West standing by the piece.
Okay.
But those art wells were built by the city of Salem. So somebody's got, there has to be documentation of how the structure fits together. I just don't know myself what it is.
I would think though that when you're figuring out how to reinstall it, that the artist has to be part of that discussion.
Yeah, I have no objection to that.
Question on that. It looked like that piece was donated. Is Bruce West the actual artist for the cube?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes.
I don't have a whole lot of records on it, so I might, if you're okay with that, then reach out to Stephen and have him take a look. I'll ask Cherie if she has some additional records. The only thing I found was from 2014. It looks like we removed it and had it polished for about $600 with Arts and Design Works Studio. So that's all the information that I have.
I don't want to do it right now, but there is some background on that piece on the Oregon Artist Series Foundation website. Okay. That piece belongs to the city. It was previously installed at City Hall. And then it was moved to that corner. I'm not sure what year, but we can figure that out.
Maybe that was the same year, the 2014. Was that what you said, Heather?
It looked to me like it had been moved from the convention center.
Mm-hmm.
Probably about that time, yeah. So I can reach out and see if Stephen doesn't mind looking at it, and I'll see what else I can find. The other question, I guess, quickly is, our maintenance budget, we're currently in the hole about $300. Overall, we have less than 64,000 total in the art fund, but our maintenance is in the negative. I chatted with some other staff, it's not a huge issue given that we have that overarching dollar figure to work with, but we would be continuing to overspend that account if this group is okay with that.
I'm okay with that.
Yes.
I mean, what we don't want are works of art in disrepair,
right?
Downtown, and I just haven't been spending a lot of time downtown to know. I know, Ritter's they have tables outside. They're open. I've never actually had a conversation with them about, how they feel about that piece. I have not myself seen abuse since I saw that guy using it as a standing desk, but yeah, crazy. Ugh. Okay. I think that we should, have Stephen take a look, make some recommendations.
Okay.
And then I'll see what I can find about the history of the work.
Bye, Rachel.
Bye, Rachel.
Bye,
Eileen,
Rachel.
Bye. See you guys next time.
Okay. Where does Bruce West live?
I think like Oswego, but definitely up in Portland.
Okay.
But that was, last I knew that was about 2 or 3 years ago, so it may have changed.
Yeah, I don't know him personally, so
I don't really either, but I did, there was some reason that I had to get in touch with him and was able to.
okay. All right. Let's move on to the Echo Earth Ball.
Quick question, or I just, while we're on maintenance, I just want to bring up the Mattingly mural is deteriorating rapidly. And I don't know if anyone's looked at that or if there is any process going on to figure out what's gone wrong there.
Eileen, you usually have the
Yes.
most information.
Yeah, the Mattingly mural does need to be redone. We ended up stopping because of the expense of it. The last figure that we got when we talked with, oh, no, I've forgotten what his name is, the muralist.
Cohen.
Was it, pardon?
His last name is Cohen.
That's right, David Cohen. Anyway, the last figure was at 16,000, and at the Mattingly Mural Committee had about, I think it was about 4,000 we had left in our pot. So that was going to have to be something that the city would absorb. And at that point, we just didn't have it. So it's probably more than that now. There are several different reasons why this is a problem, because David was not able to figure out what was going on. The best that we can think about is that it didn't bond because there was some residue from a previous overcoat, final coat, and it rejected it. So when he put on his new final coat. So that's basically where it's at. You know, murals are difficult, and they have a lifespan usually of about 20 years. And this is now almost a second life to this particular mural. But it's on the substructure is a historic wall for one thing. So any cleaning on it has to be at very low pressure.
Oh.
And that's very expensive to do. So anyway, basically what needs to be done is it needs to be pressure washed. And again, that's a very expensive process. And then probably repainted again in several sections. When we first looked into this, it was a couple of years ago. Since that time, more sections obviously need to be repainted. So I'm really worried that that whole entire mural will eventually have to be redone.
Well, I mean, for me, this brings up an interesting question, and that is, you know, the Elsinore is it's on the National Register of Historic Places. This mural is another iconic work of art downtown. And maybe it's time for us to have a conversation with Kimberly Fitzgerald, who is the historic preservation person for the city, and some of the folks at the Oregon Heritage Commission to see whether whether there's an opportunity for us to access some preservation funding for this kind of repair work, rather than using our the limited resources that we have. So, you know, part of downtown is part of a historic district. I don't know whether the Elsinore is within that boundary, but I do think it'd be worth having a conversation with the Landmarks Commission and the preservation staff. You know,
I think that would be really good, Chris, especially since I do believe that having the mural on the building actually played into it becoming a historic landmark.
Yeah, I don't know that we can, you know, you can pull up those National Register nominations online. I might do that this afternoon if I've got a little free time. But, you know, I do think that statewide, the heritage sector really is coming together, and they are they're being more creative, more open to things, more open to more diverse projects. And I just think it's, you know, this is something that is becoming more historic, but it's on one of their properties, you know, and that be a good way to start a conversation with them. Figure out
That'd
what's,
be great. It's a
Yeah.
good partnership to have going forward, because that will, I think, if we want to keep that mural going year after year after year, we need to have some other source of funds
Mhm.
than what we have.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, Kimberly, she's great to work with. You know, she works for the city. So, you know, Heather, maybe you and I could have a conversation with her, or we could call into a landmarks commission meeting. I'm sure they're meeting by Zoom as well. Do we, okay, so let's move on to the Earth Ball if this is the right time. Maybe I should say, I did get, I got it through a whole circle of people. I ended up having a conversation, a phone meeting with the mayor, people were worried that Salem was going to get cut out of part of this money from the legislature. So anyway, I spent about 45 minutes with the mayor, told him about that funding process. And then he asked, I said, well, you know, we've met because I chair the Salem Public Art Commission. And then he knew about the sculpture at the police station, and he knew that something was going to happen at the library. And then I said, well, let's, you know, he must have said, well, what else are you working on? And I said, well, you know, we remain concerned about the Echo Earth Ball. And, you know, as we know, prominent location, it's become an iconic symbol. It's at the end of the bridge. And then he just, you know, he said that, well, maybe we should try to get some money from the legislature. And I said, I think that would be a great idea. And then, you know, we talked about how much longer Peter Courtney might stay in office because he is getting older, and that, you know, there might be opportunity before he retires. And I think I think we ought to go for it. To me, the bigger question is figuring out what is it that we are going for? Like, is it a rebuild? Is it a complete disassembly and then a whatever? You know, I did say to him, and I really believe this, that every time I go down there, I'm impressed with the diverse kinds of people who use that park and use that path and use that bridge. And now with kind of kids being in school, you know, less time, it's like a giant geography lesson for anyone, you know. And plus, even if we wanted to completely get rid of it, we couldn't replace it with something different because of all of the the environmental rules in that riparian zone, what have you. Anyway, it made me think that we should, and again, I know there's no money for anything really these days, either re-engage with ARG and look at some real options, because you wouldn't be able to go have a conversation with anyone, any funder, without knowing without having done the due diligence in terms of, all right, here's option 1, 2, 3, here's the cost, you know, and here's who might be willing to pay for this. I do know that you're much more likely to get a line item appropriation from the legislature if somebody else has some skin in the game, you know, in terms of putting some dollars there. But I've seen this week on social media that ARG is actually doing a major restoration project for the Washington State Arts Commission on a big Dick Elliott piece, which I think is in Tacoma. And Dick Elliott is the guy who did the second story window installation at the Hallie Ford Museum of Art. He's the person who uses reflectors, creates giant mosaics. So, you know, they are they are working on another big restoration project, and I could call a colleague at the Washington State Arts Commission and just, get a little bit of the background. But it was very interesting because I'm sorry if I'm like a government nerd, but they actually had the scope of work, the tasks that ARG was to perform listed on a sidebar with the image of a guy up on a lift, looking at the piece up close. Anyway, I was getting back to the Earth Ball. I was encouraged by my conversation with the mayor. He immediately wanted to come to the meeting this morning. I'm glad he stayed on as long as he did. I don't consider him an expert on art matters, but he knows the legislature and he seems really committed to helping us. So again, I think just having conversations with these city council people is positive for us overall. Yeah. Eileen.
The timeline that the mayor mentioned, I think is very, very appropriate. He was talking about January. In that length of time, we should be able to find out more about what is actually needed. But we would need to get on it right away.
I agree, because even though the session starts in February, you usually have to tee these things up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and Courtney was part of what I went with her to talk to Robert. I think his last name was Kraft, Robert Kraft, with it, and he works with AIG. I think he's an independent contractor, but he is their person for that particular type of artwork.
It's Robert Kruger.
Kruger, thank you. Yeah. So anyway, that we need to have, just like with Blessing Hancock, we need to have hard facts about what needs to be done. And the mayor was mentioning how it would reduce the size. He's probably right. I hadn't thought about that. But removing the asbestos would definitely change the dimensions of it. So all those things would need to be solid before anybody goes to the legislature to ask them for money.
Yeah, absolutely. Kelly, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say that, in my life of doing things, I can see that, removing that coating of asbestos and then thinking that we're going to recoat it with something and get all those tiles to fit back on there is going to be a task that may be impossible. So I think that we might want to consider, well, how do we reimagine that? And maybe we do something very similar, but just, we may have an opportunity to reconceive what that art ball is going to be. And, like I say, it's just something to think about.
Right, Eileen.
Yeah, Kelly, what you're saying is true, but I would think there's a large percentage of that, the ball that has ocean. And so I actually do think that's not as big a consideration as would normally be, because a lot of that those are field tiles, the water sections, and there are some real precious icons with each country. So those would probably be saved if at all possible. But the field tiles are pretty expendable and they can be reworked pretty easily.
Well, and don't you think when they made it the first time, they didn't have it all planned out as to exactly how many tiles? I mean, they would probably cut them as they go, right?
That's right. There were several tile companies that volunteered their service to that. And Mary Heinzman was the person who oversaw the whole thing. So she definitely is somebody that we would have to talk to again about it. But that's why I know that how many field tiles were being used, because she talked about that.
Okay.
So it sounds like I should probably look into our contract. I think we still have a contract with ARG. I can make contact with them and start that discussion. I can also chat with our engineers and see if there's anything else that they could look into for us in the meantime as well. And then it sounded like the mayor mentioned, you know, who else we should figure out who else we'd want to have in these conversations. You mentioned Mary Heinzman and Mr. Gertenrich, and maybe some others that we would, once we have a little bit more updated information, we could bring everybody back to the table.
Yes, and
Yes.
Mary Heinzman had a person working with her. They have a lot of information written down.
Oh, okay.
So it's very important that they be included, even if they're not the ones who eventually do the redo. They've got a lot of information.
Yep.
Great. Well, we have some steps.
This is just a question, my own ignorance, but if we did ask for money from the legislature and got that money, is there a certain timeline in which that money needs to be spent? Or is that up to what we determine with the folks who are going to do the work?
Probably more.
I'm not sure. And it might have to do with the source of funds. You know, whether you got a general fund appropriation, lottery funds are dispersed quarterly. I think it varies. Okay, if there's not further discussion about the Echo Earth Ball, let's go to, just go to the mural programs. If you have anything to report or not, Heather.
I do, and I can move. I'm going to turn my video off. It seems things keep freezing up, and that seems to help. So I'm going to show. I put together a PowerPoint. I'm going to show my screen and kind of go through it fairly quickly, and I can send this out.
Cool.
And if you can let me know when that's visible.
It's up.
Great. Okay. All right. Start from the beginning. Okay. So I started looking into other programs. You know, this is not too exhaustive. It was basically a desktop, if you will, kind of review of a few different other cities. I tried to stay in Oregon just because, you know, our attorney has brought up on a number of times his concerns with free speech, and it sounds like state law could very well or has been interpreted to be maybe a bit stringent than other areas of the country. So I stayed within Oregon, tried to keep things fairly close to us and close in size where that was possible. I just looked at their code briefly, what kind of process or program they have, if any, for murals. And I did connect with a couple different staff. Hillsborough, Bend, and Eugene, those that were highlighted were staff that I've connected with thus far. I've reached out to Beaverton, and I think I have a voicemail, but I've not chatted with them yet. So just a quick review. Let me hide my screen here. So Hillsborough, we met with Michelle McCall-Wallace about a month ago. Chris joined in, and it was a good discussion. Their situation is fairly similar to what we have here in Salem. This just kind of lists the different code provisions relating to art for that city. They do have a Hillsborough Arts and Culture Council. Just to FYI, it's about 11 to 17 members per their code. Murals are exempt from their sign standards if approved through their public art program. And public art itself is sprinkled throughout. They do not seem to have, unless I missed it, a % for art dedication, but they do have public art as an option to meet certain development standards. So it's kind of sprinkled throughout their code. Here's a statement directly from their website on murals. They view it as integral part of any public art program. Murals can also provide a reduction in the incidence of graffiti and other crime. It's a statement they made, and just before I forget, Bend made that kind of same statement when I spoke with them. And in 2014 is when the murals became exempt from their sign code. So hopefully this link works. They have posted on their website their mural guidelines. And we don't have to read through this. I just wanted to kind of show you what other folks are sharing publicly and what program they have in place. In Hillsborough, anybody's eligible to submit an application for a mural. Here's the basic requirements, 1 through 6.
That screen is not popping up for me. Can anyone else see
Darn
it?
it.
No,
No one sees that. Well, that's too bad. Okay, let me just share. I'm sorry, I can forward these materials out. Basic mural requirements is that it's accessible to the public. Materials used ensure durability. The surface is stable, ready for painting. Suitable for the neighborhood. Does not impede public access and has some kind of graffiti or UV coating. The approval criteria: accessibility, artistic quality, context, feasibility, that it's original, permanence, and they like to see some community support from the building owner and neighbors. It's a simple application process that the program staff confirm and approve. And then again, those are considered loaned for a period of 5 years under an easement, similar to what we would do, requiring the building owner to maintain for 5 years. After that point in time, they can be repainted. And you're still seeing the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
yes,
Thank you. Sorry, we couldn't see the links. I have a bunch of those. Okay, Beaverton. So Beaverton just left a voicemail on my phone. They have a Beaverton Arts Commission per their code of 15 members, a pretty general definition of public art, similar to what we have. They have a 1% for art dedication. In fact, most of the other communities that do have a dedication have a 1%. I'm not sure where our half of 1% came from. And I'm not sure if that's something that's open for conversation, but it is of interest.
we asked for that.
Asked for a 0.5% or 1%?
No, added to the 1%. Do you remember that, Chris? That was about 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, I think that, yes, getting the 0.5% up to a full 1% has been on the table for a while. I think Salem adopted a 0.5% because that's what advocates at the time thought they could achieve.
Okay. Well, maybe we can bring that up again as we work with the other issues.
Yep, exactly.
So signs again in Beaverton are exempt from their sign code as it's defined as public art. So this is from their website. Here's a couple of the guidelines. Their program is very similar to Hillsborough. In fact, their mural program guidelines is pretty much the same document. 5 years that it's required to remain in place, maintained by the property owner, after which it can be removed. They do have a matching grant program, apparently, as part of that mural program, but there is at the bottom of my screen, they do have a notice that the funding is currently on hiatus. So I'm not sure what that's about. And then in looking, unfortunately, I can't link to the Beaverton tour map. I encourage you guys, if you have a few minutes, just to go to these different websites and I can share the links. It shows where their murals are across town. It looks like they have about 7. So Bend was interesting. They do have 1% dedication for art. They have a contract with the Regional Arts Council from the state to serve the Bend community. They were the only entity besides Portland that I've seen that actually has a similar funding allocations within their overall art fund, 75, 15, 10% for maintenance. And Bend has gone a different route, very similar to Portland. I actually chatted with one of the planners who manages the whole mural program. In 2019, Their council approved a code amendment that murals would be considered mural signs and subject to a simple permit process, just like Portland. So anything that's submitted by the community, it goes through that process. If it meets the permit conditions, which are laid out in code, then it's approved. And it must remain in place for 12 months. The Bend has stated that they do not do any maintenance. So if it's not maintained during that 12-month period, I think in theory they could go in and remove it. It's a fairly new program. Obviously, it's only a year old. I asked the planner about, visual clutter, enforcement issues, and she said they have not yet had any issues. They're tasked with going back after a 5-year period to see how this program works. Interestingly, the program was set up based on those, they list that litigation from the Portland area as a means of going in that direction. Corvallis, I looked at very briefly. Their code was a little bit trickier to navigate. They also have a 1% for art, an arts and culture board of 9. I think that's all I had for them. I couldn't find any murals. They do list in their 2040 vision, similar to our Salem that we're working on now, an importance of artwork. And I think murals was thrown in there. So it's kind of one of those communities to keep an eye on. Eugene, I finally got in touch with Kate Alley, their art program manager. They have a 1% dedication to public art. Murals are exempt from their sign standards if on private property outside of vision clearance areas, or it can be in right of way if it's approved by basically the city of Eugene. They have a public art committee of, it looked like 6, and I didn't see any recent notes. I didn't ask Kate about that, but the notes that they had on their website were from 2017. They have 2 very kind of cool, I think, mural programs right now. They have this urban canvas program, whereby basically the city of Eugene has worked with business owners, as we've talked about doing, to kind of identify interest in walls. And then they have developed a portfolio of interested artists that submit ideas of their work. And so anytime a business owner is interested in having a mural put on their wall, they work through this portfolio that the city has collected and choose an artist to go ahead and paint. They do have a statement on their website about this program that they can basically limit, make decisions based on hate speech, illicit drug use. If any of those, pornography, violence are I guess, brought into the discussion, they have the right to refuse that. All murals created under this program must be maintained for a minimum of 12 months. And again, it's the property owners that are required to maintain. And the other very cool program that they just recently, I think they're still moving forward, but they've reached their goal, I think. I think they're over 20. Their goal was to have 20 world-class murals in Eugene before the championships. And I think they're at 22 murals now. I chatted with Kate about this a little bit. It's really, they pulled this together with a bunch of different city partners. The funding for it, they had a basic artist stipend fee that was about, I think she said it was $3,000 is all. I mean, some of these murals are huge. If you go, I mean, they're incredible. I would again encourage you to look at their site since I can't show. But they did have some artists come in from out of town, and so what they did is they worked they worked with their partners to help secure funding. They worked with parking, the city's parking services, and used, this is a tourism, I guess, highlighted the tourism benefits from this program. And so we're able to secure funding from the parking services. I don't know that the artists were paid that much. They had their stipend, but they did help with providing, lodging and eating out options for those artists that came in from out of town, which was, I think, kind of cool. These are required to be in place for 5 years. And it's
hard to believe, but I asked Kate, you know, that they're not really technically, they're considered public art, but they're not, it was a bit fuzzy on whether or not they were part of the public collection, because it is viewed that they will be, after a 5-year period, likely no more. And it wasn't yet really clear who was going to maintain. I think the building owners are in theory supposed to maintain for that 5-year period. Again, it sounded a little less clear. The city could step in and help if needed. They had the same requirement for an anti-graffiti coatings on these walls. But it was a bit unclear. I think it's a very cool program. There was still some questions I had. I didn't speak with her for very long. She was quite busy this week, so. Corvallis, I already mentioned, and I can't show you. Again, I can send these out. There's been murals, artwork popping up in or in news articles all over. Newburgh just on their website, actually, if you look at their city website, they have a link from their homepage to a new mural that was placed on a library annex building there in town. And then Milwaukee has been working on, I think they had some new murals on businesses that they were kind of promoting, and I haven't yet had a chance to speak with them or look in detail at their code. But that was just kind of a summary of what I found. Obviously, it doesn't answer really any questions, but it kind of brings maybe a bit more context of what's going on around us and how varying and different the programs are. I think Eugene, she expressed that they probably will be looking down the road at clarifying some of the questions that I still have about their code. She understood that there could very well be some issues down the road regarding, you know, free speech questions that come up about that, or enforcement. They hadn't really dealt with that yet, but she did think it was a potential coming down the road. The picture on the right, I just thought I'd show you. This is kind of silly, but I painted that in my son's room, so I thought I'd put that in our mural for the group. So I guess that's all I had. I'm happy to answer questions if you had and try to get more information. I can send this out to the group.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Heather.
Yeah,
Very
very
useful.
helpful.
Yeah.
Good.
Please do send it out so it
Absolutely.
can click on, drill into some of those sites.
They're beautiful. Yeah, it was pretty inspiring.
Mhm. Eileen.
Also, over this last week, I had more time this last week. So I ended up doing a lot of SPAC stuff that I'd been neglecting. But I went back to your email, Chris, about the, what's it called? Central East Side.
Oh, yes.
And actually went to that link and listened to the entire Zoom meeting, which I would highly recommend everybody do, because it just really opened up my eyes as to how extensive Portland's support network is with these various agencies that we don't have, but also how they have approached the exact same questions that we are dealing with right now. And it was really interesting because they do have the city has an entire program, a Title IV program, which allows for community murals that are not considered eligible for the public art collection. There's two different paths that can be taken, and there were some changes that I thought were very interesting, and I really would like us to consider that too. For instance, it was a two-year only commitment, and basically after the end of 2 years, the mural could go away, and then a new mural come into place. These were all done in cooperation with the business owners, and so these were private people who have not only just given their walls, but also have helped monetarily to support them. It was very comprehensive, And I ended up following up by talking to, sending emails to a couple of the people who were on that Zoom talk. And Kristen Cooper is the one who runs the Title IV program for the city. And she gave me some extra information too that I was going to share with you guys later. There was just so many other questions I had that I think I would like to talk to her in person and get some other answers from her as well. But we're talking about the exact same questions we have. They dealt with this last year. And one of the questions I asked her was about the concern about content. And she said that they have eliminated that as far as the Title IV goes by not dealing with content at all, which I thought was amazing because it makes it so much easier if you don't have to regulate it. But here's the difference. They rely heavily on Portland Street Art Alliance to work with the artists. And as far as I could figure out, Portland Street Art Alliance has a fairly loose guidelines that they require of their artists when they're submitting proposals for murals. And so it seems that that is the crux of it, that they handle the content issues. And Portland Street Art Alliance is not part of the city. And so maybe that's the way that they get around it. I really don't know. I haven't gone deep enough to figure that part out, but it seems like that may be another way to go. But they're not insisting on it being part of the public art collection. That is done entirely separately, and RACC is the one that handles the murals that go for that. And they do require a content review. But it's a 2-track, and they have had a huge amount of murals done recently, and a lot of variety and a lot of people across the board in the community are participating. And it just felt so vibrant just even reading about it. So.
Kelly, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I do have a question. So the monitoring of content, if we could, in our process, make sure that we have community or neighborhood support, if that's where we allow the content review to take place, and it's basically not part of the city or part of our job, we let the community come to us and say, okay, we think this mural is a good idea. Do you think we could handle it that way?
So we kind of have that in our current, the way it currently is set up for Salem, right? That there is the neighborhood association. They have 30 days to comment, provide their feedback. I would have to defer, bring our attorney, and I think that would still, if we're still making a decision and it's not coming into our collection, we're not acquiring it, I think he still would have concerns with any kind of, if it's the community or anybody making those judgment calls. But again, I would have to defer. So we can bring him, I guess I was going to suggest that, I know we had talked about doing another convening a subcommittee, and we can do that. As I just mentioned, I have one more week and then I'm out for 2, so my apologies. We can either try to do that sooner or early September to get that going, but I would bring the smaller group back, have these notes, maybe more detail from other communities, and bring our attorney back so that he can answer those questions better than I.
Eileen.
And then just for Kelly's question there too, again, with this Title IV subtract in Portland, they do involve the neighborhood groups. However, they do not have veto power. It's just an advisory question. They have to notify them, and they have to have a public meeting or about it, but it's not at all part of the process of deciding whether or not the mural happens.
So just to follow up there, so essentially, if this group approves a mural, I mean, there could be the community decides they don't want the mural, but this other group could override that. Is that what you're saying?
They do have to have anybody who's affected by the mural, for instance, anybody who's living opposite where the mural is going to go, they have to be notified. And so that is part of that process, so that they do have input. But again, because of the fact that Portland Street Art Alliance is a separate entity, it actually goes out to the people and talks to the people as part of their process. And so they help the artists to deal with that. But by the time that a mural is in the pipeline, they have the building owner as part of it. They have the neighborhood association as part of it. They have the artist being part of it. And the Portland Street Art Alliance is helping to shepherd it through the system. And they are the ones, I haven't talked to them yet, but from what Tiffany Conklin, who runs it, she's the executive director, what she said during the meeting was rather interesting. And that was that they have a loose kind of guidelines for the artists regarding content. But it seemed like it was very minor.
Can we resend that back out? I'm sure that's buried in I'd like to look at that again.
Yeah, I'd like to see it too.
It's long. It's like about an hour plus, but it's well worth listening to.
Yeah, I can backtrack that. Okay, we're at the 11:31 mark. Covered a lot of ground this morning. Thank you all for sticking with it on the Zoom call. I guess, going back to our big decision, I hope that we'll hear from Blessing this week. And then we may need a call next week.
So I'll for sure forward, and as soon as I hear some communication, it sounds like, yeah, we might try to meet next week. I mean, what else do I have some other to-dos in terms of murals. Are we content in waiting till maybe September?
Yeah.
Is that okay? I know this goes on and on. Okay.
I'm fine. I mean, especially if you're going to be out for 2 weeks, that there's no rush.
Okay.
Do we need to move quickly? I mean, if we're going to have a proposal for the legislature in January, do we need to start moving? Our weather's going to change soon. Just getting people to physically inspect the Eco Earth Ball, is that something we need to get on really quickly, or can that wait till the next meeting?
Oh, I think things are moving slowly in general, with everybody still working from home. I mean, I think looking at the city's, does the city still have a contract with ARG, and just having a conversation with them about, what a scope of work might look like. I'll send the link out to that project in Washington that they're working on, because it's kind of interesting to see. But I think there's plenty of time to prepare for the legislature. The Cultural Advocacy Coalition, which is a 501c4 advocacy group, actually put out a call for capital projects, and I'm sure their deadline has passed, but I might just check in on that process with them. Because the Eco Earth Ball could be folded into that type of an overall ask. They've been successful at getting literally millions of dollars. And I don't know who the city of Salem's contract lobbyist is. Do you know who that individual is, Heather?
We have one lobbyist that I know of from Perseverance, who works with Courtney Knox Bush, works with him.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
But figuring out I mean, getting our arms around what this project might look like, I think that's the bigger nut, you know, like the asbestos, the structure, the rebuild. I mean, a part of me would also like to at least consider, I mean, what if that whole Echo Earth ball got scrapped and the Earth ball was recreated in cast resin so that it wouldn't have joints that water would get into. I mean, like you're at Disneyland and you're looking at a giant globe that is made of synthetic materials that are weather resistant. You know, what if this thing was recreated not in ceramic tile, but in a polymer material that would be impervious to water? I don't know, people, you know, there are companies in Oregon that make stuff like this. So maybe it's not maybe it's a rebuild, not a repair or a reconstruction. I'm just thinking off the top of my head.
Yeah.
You know, I have no idea, but it seems like this ball, it's got a lot of issues and someone's going to have to get into it and be super creative. You know, like if what we want is this Echo Earth presence in this prominent site at this big scale, you know, how can we make this happen?
How can we accomplish that for X amount of money?
Yeah, right.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you.
Anyway, I don't know. I'm still on the Disjecta board, and there is a company called Figure Plant up in Kenton in North Portland. And they do stuff like, I mean, people make stuff like this. And it just seems like we should, instead of continuing to talk to the people who made it out of clay, we should talk to the people who can make it for the future. I don't know.
$1 million is a big price tag, and there's uncertainty with.
Well, $1 million is a big price tag. If we could figure, if some expert could tell me that if we spent $1 million, we could fix this thing for good, I'd say, let's go for it.
Yeah.
But I'm just afraid that we're kind of talking about trying to put a fix on stuff that is never fixed. It's just not fixable.
Yes.
And we're not going to, you know, and the weather here is predictably bad and wet.
And if we need any further proof of that, just look again at the Mattingly mural, which I really envision as being this rotating problem.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Ongoing, and you don't want multiple artworks that constantly need attention.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why, you know, Portland RAC lobbied to get their 1% up to 2%. And they have dedicated staff that repair stuff. And those people they're just and now look what's happened. Even things that have been repaired and revered, like that elk, are being destroyed. You know, yeah. We are living in crazy times. All right, I'm also going to have to sign off. But thank you all. Shall I just leave? Are you going to keep talking?
I think we need to adjourn, don't we?
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, then let's adjourn the meeting. It's 11:38. Thank you all.